From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
House Republicans hedge on whether they'll vote tonight on a budget blueprint for President Trump's agenda after 4 GOP members suggest that they oppose it. Meantime, the Elon Musk Doge effort presses forward by sending a mass email to federal workers, asking them to reply with a list of what they accomplished last week. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Kate Batchelder-Odell. President Trump has said he wants to pass his agenda this year using one big, beautiful bill. And Speaker Mike Johnson has been trying to oblige, planning a Tuesday vote on a budget resolution to start the process of getting a reconciliation bill not subject to a Senate filibuster that could cut taxes by up to $4.5 trillion and cut federal spending by $2 trillion. But with the House majority 218 to 215, Speaker Johnson doesn't have much room to spare. And as of the latest, there are 4 Republicans who have suggested that they oppose this plan. Let's start with Speaker Mike Johnson. This is him speaking to reporters about this budget vote.
Not only are we working to find savings for the American taxpayer, to find a better, more efficient, more effective use of their dollars, which we are morally obligated to do. We also have a moral obligation to bend the curve on the debt. All of your children, all of our children and grandchildren are going to be saddled with the debt that we're spending right now. It's $36 trillion federal debt. The deficits have ballooned. We have to change that trajectory. We are going to make a big course correction in this process, and that's why the Republicans in the House and the Senate are so excited about this mission and what we can accomplish with it. So stay tuned on the details. We're going to do this methodically. We're going to do it in a very responsible manner, and we're going to achieve these goals. And we'll be working with all the members throughout the day to get to that. There may be a vote tonight. There may not be. Stay tuned. That's why you get paid. Hang around here. You'll have lots to report on.
And here from the other side of the aisle is Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries outside the Capitol.
We will push back against the reckless Republican budget until it's buried deep in the ground, never to rise again. Yeah. Never to rise again. The reckless Republican budget will hurt everyday Americans who rely on Medicaid, rely on nutritional assistance, and rely on veterans benefits. This is not a reality show. This is not a joke. This is not politics as usual. It's a matter of life and death.
Kim, as far as we can tell, what is the state of play on this budget debate as we are taping this here early on Tuesday afternoon? And more importantly, from your point of view, what is at stake in this vote?
Stepped back, I actually give Speaker Mike Johnson a lot of credit. He obviously has a caucus that has a lot of different positions and viewpoints in it. And he's actually made this pretty far along. It has made it through committee. It's made it through the Rules Committee as well. So it's primed for a vote on the floor. And if you look at some of the big categories of opposing factions in the Republican conference, everybody's generally okay with this. There's enough in this bill that people like, but don't like, but generally they view this as something that's a priority. And so most of them are on board. So what I see here, when you mentioned those 4 people that are still saying that they are holdouts, they tend to be, if you look at the names, some of the usual malcontents that like very much to see their names in the headlines, like to be courted, like to have the press running after them. Whether or not that is enough to make them change their mind in the end, if they get a call from Donald Trump, if there's some provisions fiddled here or there, promises down the road. One of those I would say no. Thomas Massie from Kentucky, he generally says no to pretty much everything that comes along, but some of the rest of the names I could see, again, with the courting that they have come to expect, that they might find their way to yes. I think the stakes are quite huge because for this to be defeated at this point, this is a House, remember, attempting to counter an alternative Senate strategy. They wanted to do a quicker, faster bill that dealt with some of Trump's immediate priorities on the border and defense. And this is the House saying the only way we can go forward is to do everything at once, including all the tax provisions. So the Senate is essentially saying, fine, go to it. Show us that you can get it done. And if that hits a roadblock, it could be very difficult because it might involve going back to the drawing board. So we will see. Look, Mike Johnson has a little bit of negotiating room here because while in theory he could really only lose one person, in reality there are some Democrats who are out for health reasons and other reasons, and that changes the fundamental amount of math. So this will be a high wire act right up until the votes are counted, and when they make a decision then if they're going to put it on the floor or pull it for a later date.
Okay, one of the debates has been about changes to the Medicaid program. You heard Jeffries bring that up. Clearly, Democrats think that is going to be a successful line of attack for them in opposing this resolution and the broader Republican efforts on this reconciliation bill. What's your view of that specific issue? What's the story there?
Well, I think some moderate Republicans also have some heartburn about touching Medicaid. And then there's a group of Republicans that want to restyle the Republican Party as a working class party and are using that as cover not to touch Medicaid. I really think it's worth driving this debate about Medicaid reform. So when we talk about finding tens of billions of dollars of savings in Medicaid, it's really important to look at structurally how this program works. When the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, was passed, Medicaid was expanded to prime age men above the poverty line who can work. And to get states to sign up for this expansion away from a traditional social safety net for vulnerable pregnant women, for instance, to get states to sign up, the federal government picked up an enormous share of the tab for these enrollees. And so basically now, if you're part of this expansion population, if you're a prime age man with no children, the federal government pays closer to 90 cents on the dollar of your cost. Whereas if you're a pregnant woman, it's closer to 65 to 75 cents on the dollar. Now, I think Republicans can win this argument. I mean, call people up and take a poll. Should Medicaid pay more to cover pregnant women or men above the poverty line? I think that really works in Republicans' favor to rationalize the way that Medicaid works so that it favors the truly needy who need the program and not these extra populations, and correcting this dysfunction. Two other just really quick examples. The improper payments rate on Medicaid is very high. States, and especially in this expansion that I was just describing, have played pretty fast and loose on verifying whether people are eligible, for instance, whether their income changes over next year and whether they're still eligible. So there is billions, I'm sure, of savings in that alone. And lastly, there's something called provider taxes that states use. And states basically will levy a tax to basically inflate what they spend on Medicaid and draw down more federal dollars. I mean, all of the stuff that I'm describing here is really dysfunctional. And I think that they are arguments that Republicans can win. And also, Trump has a real opportunity to be the one to do it because he's not beholden to what the Congressional Budget Office says. He says he's willing to, break some norms in Washington to get things done. And I just remember covering the repeal of the Affordable Care Act that ultimately failed. And everyone in Washington was very beholden to these estimates of what would happen to folks, even though Republicans had a plan to deal with that. And so I think there really is a substantive and political opportunity for Trump here to make this program significantly better than it currently is if Republicans are willing to just make that argument.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Meantime, the Senate in recent days has passed its budget resolution moving toward a two-reconciliation bill plan. Trump at some times, Kim, has seemed ambivalent about this. At one point, he said one bill, two bills, whatever works. The idea behind two bills is that you would leave the sticky tax reform details for later in the year, since there are disagreements within the GOP about the state and local tax deduction and so forth. And so, I guess the alternative, Kim, is if this vote falls through, if Speaker Johnson isn't able to get the one beautiful bill budget resolution over the finish line, is it that the House then takes up the Senate idea of two bills, which, has some strategic advantages potentially to it politically?
Trump has kept his powder dry on which direction he wants to go precisely so that he has this backup option. And he has continued to say one big beautiful bill, if that's the best way forward, if we can get it done. But there can be no doubt that he has given tacit approval behind the scenes for the Senate to move forward on this. Look, John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, had been working on this plan for a two-bill approach for a month at least prior to beginning beginning this year, and he was very much primed to go. So I see this more as a stick, as it were, a fallback option, however you want to present it. It's designed to keep the House on track. And look, I think that there's some merit to that. The House is unruly. It's got a lot of different pieces involved in it. And I'm not sure without that Senate pressure, it would be as far as it is right now. And again, it'll be really interesting to see if Johnson can get this done. He does deserve credit. There are so many factions, and yet you don't see whole blocks of people saying, I'm not going to go down the road of this House bill. It's a few, one or two holdouts here or there. The House argument, and I think that there is some merit to it, is that unless you involve and include all of those complex things like taxes, that it's not going to have enough carrots in the end to pull all of the people into all of these things. I think it's also very worried that what you end up doing, and this is the perspective from the tax writing folks in the House, is that if you have two bills and then the first one, you use up all those pay-fors and you use them for a lot of immediate things, then they are not there to use to help cover some tax costs and other additional things that they want. So they'd like to see the whole thing done in one piece, but they're going to have to prove this week that they can get it done.
And remarkable, Kate, how Republicans, maybe not surprisingly to listeners, are not exactly in perfect formation here, running off of two different playbooks, even though some of the people in the Senate are saying, well, we're doing this resolution only as a backup. It does suggest that what we need here maybe is some leadership from the White House, or on the Medicaid points you were making earlier. That's the kind of thing where it seems to me frontline members, moderate Republicans, maybe could use a little bit of covering fire from the guy with the bully pulpit.
Right. I understand why Republicans are continuing to move both of these kind of shells in tandem, because I do think there are pretty strong arguments on both sides about which one could be more compelling. I mean, I do see some wisdom in perhaps getting one of the things that the Senate wanted to do was add to the defense budget pretty substantially right off the bat, and also immigration money as well. But, the flip side is that could make it impossible to get anything through the House. There is a forcing function here, which is that many of the individual tax cuts expire at the end of the year. And so I think this is more important for the political fate of Republicans than almost really anything else they're going to do this year. More important even than perhaps negotiating the rest of the appropriations process, which they still have yet to do and may have to go to another short-term stop. So I think that the political stakes will focus them in one degree or another, because the tax cuts are going to expire and Republicans did not run on a large tax increase hitting voters in 2026. So I do think one way or the other, they will be able to figure something out. But you wouldn't want to have, for instance, an ugly bill at the end of the year that required 60 votes and Democratic support just to get something done. And that's why I do think you need the president out there really working with some of these members closely to get them on board. And I think, to Kim's point, that's what's going on, is some folks want to be courted and get some concession or another. I think in two, this is the first step. This is the shell. We're not even talking about what specific cuts or what specific programs we're going to cut here. So they need to get clear this step. This is the easy part compared to filling out the details of the bill. So I do think they'll get there. I think the political realities will focus them at some point. And I think they can also punt some of these harder questions until they actually fill out the details of the spending cuts in the tax bill.